All right, hi everybody. Thanks for turning out on a beautiful fall day for our Thursday seminar series. It's a real treat to introduce Nick Haddad for many, many reasons. He is a close personal friend, but he's also widely regarded as one of the very best in a dying field called landscape ecology. That's mostly just a little inside burn for him. It's not a dying, yeah, I know. It's not a dying field at all. Nick did his undergrad at Stanford and PhD at the University of Georgia. Then he was on the faculty at North Carolina State for a number of years, and now he is at Kellogg Biological, affiliated with the Michigan State University. Nick has really two main research foci, but does lots of really, really cool work outside of his basic fundamental research in ecology. If you've taught an ecology class or looked at an ecology textbook or taken an ecology class, you've undoubtedly seen examples of the corridor experiment, which is this landscape level novel experiment asking whether corridors promote biodiversity, promote population growth, promote transfer of pollen among plant species, and everything else under the sun you can measure in response to these corridors. Nick is also an amazing collaborator. He and I joined Tiago in a paper earlier this year, and it was a paper several years in the making, and so we got to work really, really closely together. Nick, as you'll hear, is also an expert in butterflies. You might have heard him on Radiolab. You might have read his popular book. You'll hear about his work on butterflies today. But I think if you know Nick, you also know that he is widely thought of as one of the nicest people in all of ecology. And those of you who got to meet him today, I'm sure experienced that, and I hope you get a chance to interact with him more as he's here on visits to see us, or his good friends Gideon and Marjorie, or for other reasons. So Nick, thanks very much for coming over, and take it away.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here, and great to see old friends, and also meet new people. Nate sent me an email last week and said, all right, we're putting together your schedule. Who do you want to meet with? And I said, look, I'm coming here because I want to meet graduate students and postdocs, people that I don't know and can't otherwise meet. And I just had a great day. I mean, I started meeting at 8 a.m. at Bo's Bagels, and I expect I'll be talking to people till, I don't know, 10 tonight. And that's like my dream come true. I'm an extrovert's extrovert and, ready to talk to people. So I'd love to come over anytime. If you want to talk about this stuff or other things, I'm only an hour and 20 minutes away, and I will make it. So Nate just told me that just before coming in that some students, I talked to them a little bit about this, but just wanted to hear a bit about my journey to get where I am. And so I just threw up a couple slides, and the grad students heard it, but then they can see pictures and put a message or put an image to it. So I asked about my journey, and I'm just going to show two slides that got me to this topic. And so I finished undergraduate and knew that I was going to go to graduate school to study birds. But I had this opportunity in between to spend 2 years doing ecology in Guatemala. And what a great experience to have this overseas adventure before getting into graduate school. But I didn't realize really, or I didn't internalize, here I was a bird person, that I was going to be sent to Guatemala to study butterflies until I was dropped in the woods with three things: a tent, a bike to get around the trails in the forest, and a butterfly net. And I was just told, you know nothing about butterflies, so catch everything and send it back to the experts, which I did. And I was good at catching butterflies, had a great time in Guatemala, but I really didn't know most of the butterflies. And I got a paper back a few years later that was a list of the butterflies that I captured in the region of northern Guatemala. It was a list of 535 species. That was cool. But what was cooler is the next paper I got from the expert reporting all the changes in ranges of butterflies from species that had only been observed in southern Brazil, but now were found in Guatemala too, but also all the new species that I captured. So 7 new species, but one of those new species was also a new genus. So this is a taxa that's millions of years old, the lineage millions of years old, and like think of this, a species that's a new genus. Like humans, we're a species in our own genus. Ostriches, a species in its own genus. I caught this butterfly, a species in its own genus, and I'm reading this paper about how one figures that all out by descriptions of morphology and other related species, but I'm sitting on the edge of my seat wanting to get to what? The scientific name, thinking, man, this is going to be the coolest scientific name in the world. And so get to the very end of the paper, the scientific name pops up, and it is this, Inglorious Mediocris, the mediocre butterfly. Still the coolest name in the world, but not what I was expecting. Nonetheless, related back to my journey, I caught the first 2 individuals of this new genus species. There's been 3 captured since 1992, and it got me to thinking about how rare butterflies could be. Like, was I looking at the rarest butterfly in the world? I'm skipping past that to now, almost 30 years later. I published this book on the last butterflies, and you know, the name was put on there, which I approved, but seemed like kind of a little over the top to sell books, The Last Butterflies. Now, in the talk I'm going to give you today, this title is really too optimistic about the status of butterflies. And so if you saw, a few of you were at a talk I gave at UMBS really related to this book, and you're going to see just only a few of the whole slideshow is that talk. This is all new work that talks about the status of butterflies in the United States. And so I just want to give a little bit of a history of the last 10 years of what we know about butterfly and insect decline, what people have, and so I started writing this book or thinking about it in 2013. And then, you know, we know, what butterfly do people know? Monarchs. And we know, I'm starting to write this book in 2014, monarch populations in Mexico were a 97% decline from their abundance just, you know, a couple decades earlier. So that started to seep in the public imagination about what's happening to our insects. Then Rodolfo D'Urso published an important paper on defaunation of the earth, but had this, it wasn't about insects, but had this graph nestled in that showed decline of butterflies and other invertebrates that was alarming and got people to thinking more about this. And then a big paper that set people ideas in motion came out in 2017, where in Germany, a group found 70% decline in insect biomass over a 3-decade period. And then the New York Times got involved thinking about the insect apocalypse. And then I published The Last Butterflies, and my student published a paper where he had gotten data from across Ohio for 20 years of data looking at change in butterfly abundance and decline of 2% per year. And then the drumbeat just continued. This was true for all insects in a global analysis, declining about the same rate. And finally, people started to assemble information about cause of butterfly decline. Is it due to warming? Is it due to change in habitat area or other things? So what I'm going to talk to you about is work that I've done in the last 2 years that really tackles this. And I'm going to start off by showing you what I think is the definitive study of what's happening to butterflies in the United States, and I'll tell you why. And then, so I'm talking to you in 4 parts. The second part is about what's causing insect decline. Like, that's the million-dollar question. I'll talk a little bit about species loss, which I'm frightened about now. And I've got to say that, like, if you're coming for an upbeat talk, like, you've come to the wrong place. This is quite distressing, I find. But I am going to talk about solutions, or I don't know about solutions, but ways towards solutions in the end. And so I'll start with talking about trends in US butterflies across the United States. And I want to tell you that we put together 35 decades-long butterfly monitoring programs that occur at state, regional, or national levels. And there are standardized approaches that like whole states use to monitor butterflies. And the great thing about butterfly monitoring is it's pretty easy. Like anybody in this room could get involved with monitoring butterfly data, monitoring butterflies and contributing to the best data we have to understand changes in butterfly abundances. And it's just by walking paths and counting butterflies. And in fact, you can do this in Michigan. Like one of our data sets is from the Michigan Butterfly Network, who's looking for volunteers to get people out. And what do you have to do? Like you identify a transect that might be a mile long, plus or minus, and then agree to walk it on a regular basis. It could be once a week or once every other week through the growing season. And people do this week after week, year after year. Those are the data we use. And so then what does that mean? Like these dots on this map are all the places we have long-term butterfly records from. And in total, it amounts to 35 monitoring programs, thousands of surveys by thousands of volunteers who could be scientists or just interested in nature people, adding up to millions of butterflies. And I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you what's happening with butterflies, just summed across abundance of all butterflies. And the bottom line is they're declining. I mean, it's really at an unbelievable rate. We've lost a quarter of butterflies in the last 2 decades. And so when I say that, like this is looking across the whole United States, but we see it across species. So the New York Times took our data and made this great meta-analysis like summary with effect sizes. So you can see the 0 point in the middle, which would be no change. Everything to the left is declining. Everything to the right is increasing in abundance. And what you see is that 2/3 of species are declining, and the x-axis is in 0 to negative 100% or positive 100%, declining quickly. And this includes common and rare species. Like we know monarchs are declining. We all know that. Cabbage whites are declining. I mean, this is like if you know a second species of butterfly, and if you're a gardener, like you see cabbage whites eating your cabbage or broccoli. If they're declining, like, I don't know, it's brutal. And it's true across the United States. We divided into different regions, and we find consistent decline. In the Southwest, we see particularly high rates, but consistent decline. Like you can't make up, this is not one study, one place, one person. You can't make up how general this decline is. And then we found that I've been talking about decline in abundance and overall abundance of butterflies and then of individual species. We're also finding species loss. And species loss varies across the country. The highest rate of loss, again, is in the Southwest. But we're finding that we're losing butterflies. Now, some butterflies are increasing. And when I say some, like numbers that you can count like on your 2 hands. And then the question is, what are we wanted to know what are there characteristics of species that are increasing. And one group that's doing really well are grass-feeding skippers. So skippers are like the mediocre butterfly, like small, brown, and orange. But they're species that have more than one generation a year that do not overwinter as eggs. They have ranges that include the southeast region of the United States. And they're species that are like these skippers, most of them associated with places that people are disturbing. So the New York Times did this great article on the paper, and what was like, it was an article about the paper, but they took our data and made a tool as part of the article where you can type in the city you live in and find out how fast butterflies are declining where you live. And so, I mean, how cool is that? So I did it for Ann Arbor, and you can find that things like frosted elephant have declined by 86%. Northern crescent, I mean, if you know butterflies here, like this is like nuts that these common species are declining. Northern crescent, 67%. Orange sulfur, these yellow butterflies that feed on alfalfa and other common species, declining by 50%. Anyway, go check it out. You can see other butterflies, and maybe if you're not from, Ann Arbor, you can find out how fast butterflies are declining where you live. The other thing, I just want to come to another paper that that came out more recently. And one thing to tell you is that, like, when I showed you the U.S.-wide map, there's points across the United States, but Midwesterners have a particular fondness for butterflies. So there's an incredible number of places in the Midwest where people are sampling butterflies weekly or every other week or annually. And so then we could ask in more detailed ways, what's happening to butterflies in the Midwest region? And I mean, I told you at the beginning that what I'm going to tell you about is bleak, and it's true in the Midwest. So this is the rate of population change for or change in abundance for all butterflies in the Midwest. And considered in total, almost half of species are declining significantly. No butterfly is significantly increasing. I mean, it's really a general pattern that should be ringing alarm bells. Okay, so now I'm going to head on to part 2 of the talk. So part 2 is about what's causing decline. I mean, this is the $10,000 question. And I would say that the pattern is so general, there has to be a general cause of decline. This is not like some different global change happening in some different area across the whole continental United States. There has to be a general cause. But so if you read any butterfly paper about any paper about butterfly or insect decline, like I could almost like stand here and read you or make up the last maybe the last paragraph or the last 3 paragraphs, and you go look at a paper and see the same thing, which is that, well, we're seeing these decline. The causes are somewhere between habitat loss, climate change, and use of insecticides. And so, like, then it's left at that. What is the cause? Well, we had this great opportunity a couple of years ago to get all the data in what's called panel data of all these potential drivers and put them in one place. So by county, we could get the butterfly data, the habitat data, that's easy, like any of us could do that. The climate data, that's easy, any of us could do that. But what's hard to get is the pesticide data. And we were able to get all the pesticide data for all classes of pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides in the Midwest region, and could compare these 3 major threats apples to apples to apples. So I'm going to show you 2 kinds of analysis, and but before I do that, I just need to put in perspective like what is happening with our pesticide use and how does it relate to the change in butterfly abundances we're seeing. And so there's been huge changes in pesticide technologies in the last 30 or 40 years. And so here I'm showing, I focus less on this, but I think it's worth thinking about the herbicides. So before 1995, we're using non-glyphosate products. And then as we go into resistant strains of soybeans, for example, GMO crops that are resistant to herbicides, then we switch the types of application and the rate of application and the intensity of application of herbicides. But now let's switch to the insecticides. That's really the focus of my efforts. And so before 1995, there were groups of insecticides called pyrethroids and organophosphates. And then there's a big transition. So first there's GMO crops, BT-traded seeds that confer resistance to the major corn pests, and then new classes of insecticides, neonicotinoids, like rises to the top of the new classes. But there's not just changes in the insecticide technology, but the changes in how the technology is used. And so we go from pre-1995, where farmers are reactive. There's a pest problem, we put out pesticides, to post-95 technologies, where there's prophylactic use of insecticides. That is, the insecticides are applied every place, every time, whether or not there is a pest problem. Okay, so now let's switch to some results. So let me walk you through this analysis. So this is called counterfactual analysis. And so the idea is to create like a counterfact given some difference in change, difference in some independent variable given the case that it hadn't changed going back 20 years. And so the idea is that you run essentially a regression type model, and then you determine the coefficients, but then you set the value at the original time as not changing. So what if pesticide uses were identical now to what they were in 1997 when our study started? And so the way to interpret this graph is the counterfactual is the baseline. So if there was no change in insecticides, but we know insecticides change. So what happens relative to that counterfactual? Butterflies decline in abundance by about 10%. And that's true for abundance. It's true for, species richness. It's true for abundance. Same counterfactual modeling approach and observing that insecticides are the cause of decline. And we did the same thing with the counterfactual that climate hadn't changed or land use hadn't changed, and they aren't important factors in determining the loss of insects. So that's one way of looking at the data. Another is in a more standard regression model, where we could look at response rate or effect sizes as we look across our variables. So here I'll show variables with pest control, and we see that with neonicotinoids, the abundance of butterflies drops. And then we can look at all classes of pesticides and changes in insect pest control technologies, and neonicotinoids pop up as the greatest cause of decline. And then we could go from pest control to our other factors that might be causing change. And so whereas insecticides pop up as causes of decline, other factors don't. And so no factor related to land use came up as important. In terms of weather, we know butterflies can increase in years that are warmer later on or that rain later on, but that's a year-to-year factor that isn't going to be important in driving insect decline. And so this is also true for monarchs. It turns out that insecticides arise as the dominant factor in cause of monarch decline over the nearly 20 years that we have done our study. And so if I could just sum this up, across all the potential global change drivers, insecticides rise to the top of causing insect decline, and that's including decline in abundance, including decline in species richness. And then we focused on this one case of monarchs as an individual species, and it rises to the top in that as well. Okay, so what are the implications? I do have to make a commentary about issues with understanding effects of insecticides. Turns out that, so our data analysis stops in 2014, which is the last year that you can get insecticide data. Turns out that companies aren't required to report insecticide data, so you cannot get information on what insecticides are applied where. And so what we know is since 2014, butterflies have continued to decline. We don't have the pesticide data, and yet we've got these other global changes happening concurrently. So since 2014, we've seen the 10 hottest years on record. And yet, here's the conundrum. Till 2014, we know that insecticides were the strongest factor causing decline. Now we have no information. So like for me, I'll just have to assume that insecticides continue to be the cause of decline until we have data to say otherwise. And so insecticide companies are putting themselves like in their own jeopardy by not providing the data to say, oh man, there's actually some other cause. Okay, so part 3. So far I've been talking about insect abundances mainly writ large. Like if you just add up all the butterflies occurring in an area together, they're declining. And then for the Midwest, I did show one graphic with individual species. But I want to circle to what was the topic of my book, The Last Butterflies, and has been part of my scientific and journey and my passion for over 20 years, and that's the rarest butterflies in the world. And the bottom line is that species are being lost. And here I'm talking about the rarest butterflies in the world, and they're going to be at the front edge of extinction. And so I'm going to start my conversation about the rarest butterflies with the one I've studied the longest, the St. Francis satyr. So until a few years ago, over most of the 20 years that I studied the butterfly, the total global population size was about 3,000, give or take. So a tiny number of butterflies. Like if I could just gather all those butterflies together and squish them into a ball, it would be like this many total butterflies in the world. And they're rare, and this is the global range of the butterfly shown in blue. And so if you squint for a second, you'll see it is there in southern North Carolina. And so I worked there for over 20 years, and I told you the population size, worldwide population size is about 3,000. And so here I have this big smile on my face because I'm standing next to about 30 of these butterflies, right? So 30 out of 3,000, it's a huge number. Every day I see them, it's exhilarating. But I have like a bigger smile than usual on my face because it turns out that the center of the butterfly's range is an army base, and actual center of its range is a bomb range on the army base. So the big smile is because, well, I guess I made it so far. And the two things to say about this butterfly. One is that I was invited in the early 2000s as a conservation biologist and a scientist to help give the Army advice on how do we turn around the population sizes of this butterfly and see it recover again. And so what I'm showing you, so these are populations that are not in the bomb range. There were a few outside, and the numbers and letters mean nothing except their designations of populations. And very quickly after I appeared, butterflies started to be lost. And then population after population was lost. And I'd taken the strategy of just standing back from the idea of don't do anything to their habitat. Nature will take its own course and be good for the butterflies as long as people don't interfere. Well, that was wrong, and watching these butterflies decline really showed my ignorance and arrogance as a scientist in like thinking that I could save the day. And so it caused us to really rethink how we approached conservation of this rare butterfly. And one key part of the butterfly's population dynamics that you need to know that helps make sense of the butterflies, where it's present and where it's lost, is that it depends on natural disturbances. So it lives in wetlands along streams. And so those wetlands are maintained by beaver that create dams. Now the butterflies can't live where there's a pond, but once those ponds draw down after beavers abandon it, then the nice wetlands form. And then their wetlands are sustained by frequent fires that burn through. These are very productive areas in the southeastern US, and burn through to burn out the shrubs and the trees that would shade out the butterfly's food plant, which is a sedge. And so this helps to explain why the balm ranges are so good. The balms set almost annual fires that replicate what would have been true in these environments naturally when lightnings caused fires that burned across the landscape. And so we didn't have these tools at our disposal to like make more fires, but we could try to do what beavers do. And so we used what's the second best tool in my toolbox. Tool number one is a butterfly net, but the second best is this thing called aquadams, which are basically big inner tubes that you roll out and then you fill with water from a stream. And so what we were trying to do was create wetlands, but not ponds. So we don't want what a beaver ends up with, but we want wetlands that saturate soil, so going to the right behind it and allows sedges to grow. We're really good at this. So we worked in a place where the butterfly was first discovered in the early 80s, and then that butterfly population was lost, and it hadn't been seen for a couple of decades, but we thought, all right, this is a great foundation for where we can see through butterflies to recovery. And so we put in those aquadams and then seeded in a few butterflies to like launch a population, and the population rose quickly. And so I told you earlier that we thought there were about 3,000 butterflies in the world. So here at this one site that was maybe a hectare in size, we were seeing hundreds of butterflies, like maybe a quarter of the worldwide population. And we thought we were really onto something, and we replicated this in other places. We thought we were onto something, but we weren't. So for reasons we still can't explain, the butterfly declined where we've been doing restoration. But they didn't just decline there. They declined everywhere, including in the balm ranges. And now we've seen 2 individual butterflies since 2022, and like there is a chance that the butterfly is lost. So that's St. Francis satyr, which is one endangered species. I've worked with others. So this is the Miami blue butterfly, which its historic range was throughout South Florida in the 80s. Like for butterfly collectors, it was considered a weedy butterfly. Like there's too many of them, so pass on to the more interesting things. But by the early 90s, there were just 5 populations left, and they were scattered through southern Florida. But they quickly started to disappear. And the last population was thought to go extinct when Hurricane Andrew hit Elliott Island off of Homestead, Florida. But luckily for this butterfly, it was resurrected by discovery in not one, but 2 other places. But still, its populations are fragile, and no individuals have been observed since 2022. And then there's a butterfly I haven't studied, the Lang's meadowlark. This is found in the San Francisco Bay Delta. It's been rare for many, many decades, but no individuals of this butterfly have been seen since 2022. Now, I use these 3 examples of these last 3 butterflies because there's only 28 butterflies listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. So 3 out of 28 species might be lost. And in some ways, like, it's distressing and surprising in a way, but when the background rate of loss is 1/4 of butterflies in 20 years, this is the leading edge. I mean, this is what we're going to be facing coming into the future. Okay, and I wanted to say one other thing. I've just been talking about butterflies, but I love this quote from Henry Walter Bates: "As the laws of nature must be the same for all beings, the conclusions furnished by butterflies must be applicable to the whole organic world. Therefore, the study of butterflies, creatures selected as the types of airiness and frivolity, will someday be valued as one of the most important branches of biological sciences." And I put this up here because I do think butterflies are strong indicators of decline. They're the only insect group that we can know well. And most other studies, broad-scale studies of insect abundances, are showing similar levels of decline. But I'm just going to point to one example. So I co-lead with Sarah Evans, the long-term ecological research site at Kellogg Biological Station. We'd love to have you over and get you involved in research if you are interested. Happy to talk more about it. But we're dedicated to biogeochemical cycles mainly and microbial dynamics, not to insects or animals mainly. But early on, this is now going back to 1988 when the site was started, one person got involved studying lady beetles. Why? Because our sites are in ag landscapes, and lady beetles are a potential natural predator for aphids and other pests. So that's why it was studied for reasons of biocontrol, and we were able to fortuitously monitor things like invasions of different lady beetle species. But we were also able to see decline of lady beetles across our site. And it turns out that lady beetles at Kellogg Biological Station are declining at the same rate as butterflies. Okay, so now I don't read this slide, but I have to say something about my story arc. This is Kurt Vonnegut's kind of descriptors of the types of stories one can tell or write. And I'm just going to point out 2. And the one is the story I'm currently telling, the one from bad to worse, like the Twilight Zone. And like, this is the story, at least I never want to be telling. So now I'm going to try to change gears and tell the story I want to tell, the man in the hole story arc, where you like dig yourself into a deep hole and then try to claw yourself out if you can. So here I'm going to try to claw myself out with the last few slides. And what I'm going to talk about is what I think is real conservation via 3 paths, and 2 that I think can impact, like have broad scale impact on insect conservation in the country and in the world. But the first one I'm going to tell you is not about that. It's about something near and dear to my heart, which is, well, it turns out that Michigan is a hotspot for the rarest butterflies in the world. And we have a program led by Dave Pavlik at the John Ball Zoo that is dedicated to rearing these butterflies in captivity and then growing populations that can be released out into restoration areas. And one of those, and so our efforts are like catching butterflies, and then we can grow populations in the lab at incredible rates because butterflies can produce many eggs, and then those have high success rates. But one of the species we're studying is called the Powashiek skipperling butterfly. And the red dots on this slide show where its populations were located up to the mid-90s. Okay, those are the red dots. Now look at the green dots. That's where its populations are today. 2 in southeast Michigan and 1 in Manitoba. This species was wiped out in a blink of an eye from a common species distributed across the Midwest, US Midwest, to almost nothing today. And so just going back to our captive breeding, like we are seeing successes. we have many more individuals at the greenhouse at the John Ball Zoo than there are in the wild in the world, but we're now starting to release them to try to grow the populations again. Another butterfly that is in our hotspot for rare butterflies of the world, Michigan, is the Mitchell satyr that's found in fens, half dozen fens in southern Michigan. It also is found in Mississippi and Alabama. And so a postdoc working with Sarah Fitzpatrick is asking questions about, can we rescue populations in the northern part of the range by interbreeding them with southern populations that may be better adapted to warmer climates in the future. So more efforts to try to conserve rare species. But the problem with what I'm showing you is that, you know, we're making like the best efforts we can to conserve the rarest butterflies, but really how many can we do that for? Like almost none. And we're facing a bigger, more general problem. So I'm going to tell you two other paths to conservation that I think are realistic and are of the magnitude needed to halt butterfly decline or maybe reverse and see butterflies and insects increase again. And so one is the ending the prophylactic use of insecticides. So right now, we are saturating our environment with insecticides. Every corn seed that's planted across 100 million acres of the US Midwest is coated with insecticides every year. And that's also true of about half of soybean seeds. The problem is that there's no problem almost any time because, wow, BT actually controls the major pests of corn. So the insecticides aren't needed. And in fact, the farmers gain no economic or yield benefit, and somebody's bearing a cost of applying these insecticides. Okay, and then my last example of truly large-scale conservation, and this is going to focus on the Midwest, is what I view as conservation that's hidden in plain sight over millions of acres. And so what do I mean? You know, when I was in graduate school or beyond graduate school or undergraduate, like I had vision for what I wanted conservation to look like. I wanted big wilderness conservation to conserve biodiversity, to conserve ecosystems. And so places like this, the Kadza Prairie, that's the biggest area of tall grass prairie remaining in the country. But what do our landscapes look like in Michigan or the US Midwest? Well, they look like this. The natural areas are things like riparian buffers or hedgerows, or one thing we work at our station, prairie strips. They're small compared to the scale of, you know, the loss that's behind it. So how do we do real conservation at scale? Now I'm going to show you the next slide, which I really don't want you to read except to say that we have data on yield measured on the ground using drone and satellite imagery measured remotely across the entire Midwest. Other data on soil, on moisture and elevation that affect yield. We have all these data and we have models to predict, to understand and predict where yield is good on farms. And so here's an example of long-term yield data on one farm through corn-soy rotation in the US Midwest. And it's scaled from red, which is poor yielding land, to blue, which is, you know, high yielding land. And so this is year to year over time, but if we integrate it over time, there are places on farms that are consistently under yielding and should not be farmed. Okay, so then so this is just within one farm. What does this mean for the US Midwest? And this is work thanks to my colleague Bruno Basso. This is for a farm landscape in Iowa. All the green areas are consistently under yielding and shouldn't be farmed. So this is a landscape. This is a county in Iowa. And this is the US Midwest. And it turns out that 25% of the US Midwest that is farmed is consistently under yielding and should not be farmed. And so like now that I know this and I drive around, and like when I drove from Kalamazoo to here in the morning, I would have seen, if Nate didn't make me get up at 5 a.m. and drive over here, but anyway, I would have seen, and you will see too, is areas like this that are inundated, and still, look, they're never going to yield, but there's corn plants planted right through these areas. And then other areas are often at the edge of fields where disturbances and soil compaction cause low yield. And then there's other reasons. But by not farming these areas and planting to perennials, well, there's benefits. They're under yielding, so they're not necessarily revenue generating. They increase biodiversity. They increase carbon sequestration. You're not applying nitrogen, so you reduce nitrate runoff into the environment. You reduce the CO2 that's generated by creating the nitrogen in the first place. You reduce pesticide application over 25% of the US Midwest Corn Belt. So that's the vision. It's a real vision, but then the question is like, why? The question I always get, why would farmers do this? And so here's an example of work done by one of our graduate students, Rachel Drobnak, who did a partial economic analysis taking in the costs and benefits of farming. And so just taking straight up the costs and benefits, this shows on the horizontal axis, the proportion of average yield. So going to the right is declining proportion of average yield. And then the net gain or loss on the vertical axis. And so I'm going to start with the red line, which is if a farmer just planted an area to prairie, when do they make money? With what yield do they make money? And it turns out if corn or soybean yields are 52% below average, farmers make money straight up by planting prairie. And then if you add in government incentives like CRP, Conservation Reserve Program benefits, then farmers make money if the yield is 73% or less. And I want to advertise, Rachel did this great partial budget. I have copies of it here, but you can go check it out on her website, and it's got the tool for a farmer to get on and put in costs and benefits and determine whether areas should or should not be farmed. Okay, so my last slide is just the question I always get, why should we worry about conserving butterflies? And so first, I do think butterflies are canaries in the coal mine. Butterflies are strong indicators for what's happening to insects, more generally, insects that we can't monitor at the rate that we monitor butterflies. And of course, butterflies are parts of ecological systems. They're prey, they're pollinators, and they have economic value. I had a postdoc who worked in cotton in Texas, and she tracked like individual plants and the pollinators that came. And we, of course, all know that bees are strong pollinators. And do butterflies provide any benefit above what bees would do? And it turns out that butterflies pollinate flowers on plants at times of day that certain flowers are flowering, at times of year that certain flowers are flowering, that bees will not pollinate. And butterflies are worth $100 million of cotton production a year in Texas alone. And then finally, in the end, we're seeing extinction. And why conserve butterflies? Because people shouldn't be the cause of the loss of species from the face of the earth. So with that, I'll just say that what I'm talking to you about today is the work of many people, teams and working groups. And anyway, too many to name, but lots of great folks contributed to these efforts. And I'll end there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you all.
Test.
We're going to get a mic.
Thank you for a great talk. I really enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed it because I agree with the analysis. So I was pre-positioned to enjoy it, I'm sure. But then at the end of your talk, that's why I started deviating just a little bit from your analysis. I think your analysis was correct, don't get me wrong. But my experience is not here in Michigan. Well, I live here, but my experience is not mainly in Michigan and the United States. I work in Mexico and Puerto Rico. And I used to work in Nicaragua, I used to work in Costa Rica, and so I've seen all sorts of evidence of exactly what you're talking about. Pesticides are out of control, especially the areas I go to. They're more out of control than they are here, as a matter of fact. And so you're absolutely right that that is the major problem. It's not just butterflies, it's insects overall. But there's in your analysis, I think there's an elephant in the room that you're not considering, and I'd like to bring that up.
Great.
And that is, as I travel around the world and look at all these agricultural areas that are spreading these pesticides around and everything, I also find another movement that's happening, and that is a movement towards agroecological production. And agroecological production is being promoted by small-scale farmers the world over, and very, very explicitly as an anti-pesticide component to the whole thing. So rather than worry too much about maintaining the production of large-scale industrial farming, maybe we should be talking about promoting an alternative form of agriculture.
Yeah. Well, I can't disagree with anything you said. It's a whole arm of our work and effort at Kellogg, thinking about regenerative agriculture and new practices. But I mean, I fully agree. It's a big lift, as you know. I mean, you're at the front lines of thinking about it. Well, you're probably seeing even more of it than I am, but it's a big lift. And the question is how to promote it better and at scale in a landscape where 100 million acres is corn and soy, and like you're talking about all the places you worked, then we worry about the same issues in Brazil and Argentina, which are the other 2/3 of corn and soy. Or like I just wrote a proposal with a postdoc from UC Davis who works in citrus, and there's the same issues of in California asking about pesticide production. But anyway, I'm for sure with you. And then the question is, what's the fastest path to, like now I'm not looking through specifically the lens of butterflies and other insects. What's the fastest way to reverse decline? They're declining so quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
Great talk, thank you. So I had a question about your economic analysis.
Yeah.
What crop was that modeled on? Because I can't imagine that you would see an increase in yield in something that's like wind pollinated, like corn, but I could for soy, because I know that if you have pollinators around soy, it actually contributes to
All right,
crop
let me
production.
just skip. So it was corn and soy, but wait, what about the increase in yield? It's not an increase in yield. It's not, oh, let me make sure I understand your question. So the graph is showing just what the background proportion of yield is, and then the y-axis is economic gain or loss. But then,
Right.
So
there's a positive effect, right? The more prairie you have around.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's misleading. So the prairie is only saying when should we convert to prairie? That's all it's saying. It's not talking about the impact of prairie.
Okay.
So then that's the next. This takes into account nothing about the biodiversity benefits of having prairie. So
Okay.
I was unclear on that. Sorry.
One other question. I think I saw a positive effect of glyphosate on butterflies in your
Yeah.
meta-analyses. Was that
Yeah,
from
so
the
you did see that.
skippers?
So there's two issues. There's big issues there with, the two different analysis, one has a temporal component, the counterfactual, and the other is looking at year-to-year changes. And the problem is that there is a problem that there is change of use of these pesticides over time, and then they're intercorrelated with each other, so it leads to wonky results like that, but glyphosate declines in use with glyphosate resistance, and then you're seeing also butterflies declining at the same time, so you do get some weird correlations.
I see. Thank you.
I'm going to try to follow up John Vandermeer's question with a
Yeah.
couple others that are partly of a more political nature. Have you taken your talk to the Michigan Farm Bureau or to the any of our elected representatives who work on the Senate Agricultural Committee? Because the subsidies structure of the Farm Bill, of course, is promoting, you know, industrial agriculture, but it's also been slightly nudged in the other direction, often by studies like yours. And perhaps you could have a big impact because the public loves butterflies. And as sentinel groups, they are, you know, I would think that this could be a very popular lever for shifting some of those subsidies so that it does promote small-scale diversified farming instead of industrial agriculture.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. We work at the station through another long-term project, long-term agroecosystem research project that's stakeholder-driven with MDARD and others in state agencies, and so they do see this. My collaborator on that work, Bruno Basso, he's really the motivating force, is out in front of legislators. Yeah, it's a big lift though. We're trying. But yeah, that analysis doesn't take into account the subsidies that are going into maintaining farming where yield is so bad. I mean, that's excluding all of that.
Any other questions for Nick?
Yeah.
If not, oh, where's one? Up here? Yep, great.
I know in the Midwest, obviously, agriculture use is huge. But what about, like, and I agree with you, like, the problem for insects is dire and probably for lots of other things, but certainly for insects. What about, like, all the suburban yards? Like, if we could get local movements of people getting rid of some of their grass and planting more native plants, like, could that help enough?
Yeah, well, could it help enough? It helps for sure. I think there's several lines of conservation that are hidden in plain sight. One is some pollinator conservation in yards, other is along roadsides, and then the agriculture that I talked about. So yes, for sure, 100%.
Last one here. Sorry to make you run. Thanks. What should I go? Yes. Okay.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Okay, so this was really interesting. Thank you. I was interested. So I can't remember the name of the exact species, but when you were going over your habitat restoration project with the acronyms,
Yeah.
I was really interested and saddened to see that the population just crashed after what seems to be a great recovery. And if not for what you said about other populations shrinking or going extinct as well, I would have thought that this might have to do with like low genetic diversity, founders effects, etc. But do you know what do you have any ideas as to what might have happened?
So yeah, so the question is about what caused the crash in population size, and the answer is, sadly, we do not know, and that crashed in parallel with what was always our safety net, which is what was going on in the balm ranges, because besides the balms, which have helped the butterflies, those areas aren't used by people. Something general happened, we think, but we don't know what it is, and so yeah, I don't know. I'm sad about that, and don't know.
Did you have any data on the genetic diversity of the subpopulations?
We have some from a while ago, yes. In fact, we're looking at it now. It's a subspecies along with the Mitchell satyr, and so cinnamon matan at our station is looking at this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick.
making him do all the work.
What?
We're making him do all the
Yeah,
work.
good. All right, perfect. Hey, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, no, today was really busy for me, so I was really sad that I could not like put my name to meet you. Like whatever was empty was like out now.
Well, I did. I come around here every 2 months or so. Nate drags me over one way or the other. So I'd be happy to meet up later.
Yeah, I would love to chat sometime. Also, like Ellis is also Bill Fagan's student.
Yeah.
So I'm also from Bill Fagan's.
You are?
So I met where am I forgetting his name? He's in Georgetown.
Leslie Reed?
Leslie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Leslie was my undergrad in 1994.
Oh wow.
And we still
Small world.
together.
Yeah, no. Leslie tried to get me into butterflies and like butterfly net project.
Ah.
And,
If anybody could be convincing Leslie, because if you didn't do it, you're hopeless.
yeah, probably not butterflies, but yeah, I would love to chat some. So
I'll let you know when I'm coming to again.
yeah, for the question that he asked, I was thinking at the same time, like because you did that restoration, in some cases, like where I've been sampling, you see things like parasitoid increase when you have humidity increases, which can then take out like the caterpillar population, and the way it suddenly declines, it can be like one of the things which can go that fast is parasitoids.
Could be. I mean, that's the thing. We do not know. I mean, but then something general like that would make sense. If there's something tied to climate that then ties to some other. Well, the whole area that was occupied by butterflies is about 10 by 10 kilometers, but that's strings of wetlands along streams that are spaced out by 100 meters or 200 meters, so fairly close. Yeah, very quickly.
So either predatory, but I think parasitoids more because predatory population, like things can be more general, but they would not prefer like one specific. Like if you have like hunting wasps or like something, but like parasitoids are very specific, and the rate at which it dropped, and sometimes like parasitoid like growth is proportional to temperature, so the temperature increase would have maybe like when you have disturbance, it actually takes out also the parasitoid population.
Okay.
So if you have both of them, maybe it would do, but if one of them exists, either the parasitoid takes over or I don't know. I was thinking on those.
No,
lines.
this is exactly what I need to hear because we don't know. And it might be too late is the problem. It might be too late, but it's general. Like the even though there's just a few populations, if they all crash simultaneously, it's surprising. But that's
Because it is then linked to humidity and environmental factors. So whenever you have tried to restore them without the disturbance, the parasitoids will take over. And these might be generalist parasitoids, which might be impacting sister like caterpillars also. Predators can do that, but then you won't see that, right? Because if it were predators, they would learn for some time, but then it would be a different type of dynamic. Yeah.
well. Thanks for that thought.
Yeah. No, but like I would love to chat sometime.
Yeah. Okay. I come down.